even after the deal, Iran continued to preserve and expand its nuclear weapons know-how for future use. Why would a terrorist regime hide and meticulously catalog its secret nuclear files if not to use them at a later date?
If you saw this presentation this afternoon, you had to be impressed, not only the way it was done, but what he said. And joining us right now is the man behind that presentation, who was working without notes, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, live in Jerusalem. Welcome, Mr. Prime Minister.
Welcome.
Thanks so much for your time.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good to talk to you.
Well, yesterday, I understand you were able to get that treasure trove, thanks to the Mossad and their great work, out of Iran in January. Why did it take so long to present it here in May?
I won't say how we got it and who got it, but Israel obtained this information actually in February. It's 100,000 plus documents. Huge trove, as you say. It's in Farsi. We had to put translators on it, professional people who understand these scientific and technological things. So it took us a while to do it. I met the president in early March, President Trump. I described to him what we have. I said that we'll move immediately all this information to the United States, which we did. So we've been examining it simultaneously here in Israel and you in America. And it's taken us a while, but I think we know what we know. I presented what we know, and it's bad enough. This regime, the preeminent terrorist regime of our time, in which its goons chant death to America, death to Israel, this regime had a secret nuclear weapons program, and they're trying, under a very bad deal, to get a nuclear arsenal. They shouldn't get it.
And go ahead.
Tell the folks at home, just to piggyback on what you're saying, the mullahs are saying death to America, death to Israel. They have funded proxy wars, funded terrorism, killed American soldiers in Iraq. So describe a world where these radical mullahs, these radical Islamists, would be armed with nuclear weapons, and how serious this would be for Israel and for the United States and the rest of the world.
Well, Ainsley, what you just described is what Iran is doing today without nuclear weapons. I mean, it's gobbling up one country after the other. It's threatening to annihilate Israel. It's trying to put its army in Syria in the service of a tyrannical regime. It's putting precision-guided munitions in Lebanon. That means that they can fire rockets into Israel that can hit the office I'm speaking in and everything else. They're trying to foment terrorism in Gaza. They're firing rockets into Riyadh, into Saudi Arabia, right now from Yemen, which they're also seeking to conquer. I mean, that's what they're doing now, and they hate America. They hate America's guts. So I think if that's what they're doing without nuclear weapons, think of what will happen when they get an arsenal of nuclear weapons if this deal just goes through as is. So I'm very glad, I have to tell you, that President Trump has stood so firmly and so clearly on this issue. And he said that will not happen. And that is something that I fully back. And I think it's not only in the interest of Israel and the United States, that's obvious. It's in the interest of the world. This tyrannical, anti-American regime should not have nuclear weapons.
Okay, and that's one of the reasons you made that great display and presentation yesterday live on television, Mr. Prime Minister, because you want the President of the United States to pull out, and the date certain is May the 12th. But what do you say to the fact that Mike Pompeo and our intel people have said that the country of Iran is in compliance right now with the deal?
If you have a terrible deal and you comply with a terrible deal, that doesn't help you at all. I mean, this deal right now, assuming Iran just complies with it, they'll go the distance and have, within a few years, precisely as President Trump said yesterday, they'll have the wherewithal to produce 100 bombs, nuclear bombs. So that doesn't justify continuing with the deal. And I think it's certainly not continuing with it as structured. I think, I've said it's either fully fix or fully nix. Fully fix, you need a major overhaul. It really means a new deal. But, the person who's going to make that decision for the United States is one person. That's President Trump. And I trust his judgment. I know that he'll do the right thing. And I said yesterday, he'll do the right thing for America, the right thing for Israel, and the right thing for the security and peace of the entire world.
So, Mr. Prime Minister, tell me if this is true. The program shows that they wanted to build a bomb, because then that shows Iran is lying, because they always have said they didn't want to build a bomb. It was much more extensive than anyone thought, okay? So fundamentally, we go into this deal 3 years ago under the wrong premise. Next, is it true that nothing's been done on this program since 2003?
First of all, everything you said before the last question is true. When they did the nuclear deal with Iran, it was premised, its implementation was premised on the fact that Iran would come clean. And it would admit if it had any nuclear weapons program. They didn't come clean. They lied. One item after the other. They lied to the International Atomic Energy Agency, and they were supposed to come clean. That was the premise of the deal. So the deal was flawed from the start by many things, but including on this very central premise. Now, what they've done since 2003 is they took the people who worked on this secret nuclear weapons project and they embedded them in other organizations, and they continued what they call dual-use programs. In other words, they're supposedly doing civilian things, but they're really geared for the ability to have nuclear weapons capabilities. And that's what they kept. If this thing is so unnecessary, you got to tell me this. Why did they keep this archive, these secret atomic files, so secret? Why did they hide it? And they hid it with extra special effort after they signed the Iran nuclear deal, because they knew. They lied. They lied in order to get the deal, and they're still lying. They're trying to basically have their yellow cake, as I say, and eat it too. They want the capacity. Yellow cake is how you make
our Secretary of State.
Uranium. But that's what they're trying to do. So they're trying to bamboozle the entire world, and I'm very glad that President Trump has said, well, you know, enough of that. We're not going to be hoodwinked. We're not going to be taken for a ride. We're going to have to do a serious change here to make sure that Iran does not have nuclear weapons. That means that this deal was a terrible deal. It should have never been concluded. There needs to be a change right now.
Yeah, well, our Secretary of State confirmed that that all of these documents, and our intelligence officials have confirmed that these documents are legit and they have been lying. Let's talk about the importance of what's about to happen in a few weeks. President Trump has recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The embassy is going to open there. And this is something that other presidents have promised in the past here in the U.S. and have never delivered on that. It seems to be very different, this relationship you have with President Trump versus your relationship with President Obama. Why? Tell me about the significance and your relationship with President Trump and what this means, opening this embassy there.
Well, first of all, I think that President Trump did a historic thing. And, you know, our people will remember it for many, many generations. I'm sitting right now in the Prime Minister's office. It's in Jerusalem. Right next to me is our parliament, the Knesset. It's in Jerusalem. Right next to that is our Supreme Court. That's in Jerusalem, too. And the seat of our president, that's in Jerusalem. So everybody knows that Jerusalem is Israel's capital. It's been the capital of the Jewish people from King David's time. That's 3,000 years ago. And it took President Trump's leadership to say something so clear, a simple fact, to put forward a simple truth, but an important one. And I think there's tremendous excitement in Israel for the upcoming moving of the American embassy to Jerusalem, and we deeply appreciate it. It was a great act. My relationship with President Trump is terrific.
Absolutely.
And
do you want him to come,
between Israel and the
Mr.
United
Prime
States,
Minister?
the alliance between our two countries has never been stronger.
And do you want him to come? Do you want the president to be there?
Love to have him here. It's his decision. He's got an open invitation.
All right. Benjamin Netanyahu there in the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem. Sir, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for joining us. Wonderful to talk to you. God bless you.
Hi, this is Tim with Moriel TV and Moriel Radio here live in California with James Jacob Prash, and this is This Week in Prophecy.
Blessings in Jesus, dear friends, and once more, what a week it has been. In Hawaii, just as the volcano continues to erupt, some late native Hawaiians are saying it's the return of the god/goddess Pele, the goddess of fire and of volcanoes, as Mount Kilauea continues to pour out lava, and now a mixture of poison gas and lava.
This is a civil defense message for Tuesday, May 8th at 6 a.m. The East Rift Zone eruption in Leilani subdivision continues. Hawaiian Volcano Observatory confirms volcanic activity has paused at all 12 fissures. Hazardous fumes continue to be released. A total of 12 fissures have emerged and 35 structures have been destroyed. Due to the eruption, the following are issued. Conditions permitting, Leilani Estates residents will be allowed to check on their property from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. each day until further notice. Follow the instructions of the authorities on scene. Be prepared to evacuate at a moment's notice. Highway 130 is closed between Malama Street and Kamaili Road. Pohoiki Road is closed from Highway 132 to Hinalo Street. Civil Defense has established a community information center at Sacred Hearts Church in Pahoa, Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Entry placards for residents who wish to retrieve personal items from Leilani subdivision will be available at the Community Information Center. Hawaii Electric Light reminds residents to treat all downed lines as live. Under no circumstances are you to approach or touch downed lines. A water truck for public use is located near the vacation land mailboxes. No access is allowed at this time for residents of Lani Puna Gardens due to dangerous volcanic gases. Department of Education reports all public schools will be open today. However, the following charter schools are closed today: Kua'aukala and Hawaii Academy of Arts and Sciences. United States Postal Service announced that evacuated residents can pick up their mail at the Pahoa Post Office. The Hawaii County Police Department and the Prosecutor's Office have established a policy of zero tolerance toward looting or vandalism. Under emergency provisions, any looting or vandalism will be treated as a felony. Puna Geothermal Venture reports no activity at this time, and the facility is secured. Precautionary measures are being taken to remove flammable materials off-site. The residents of Leilani Estates are going through a very difficult time. This is not the time for sightseeing. You can help tremendously by staying out of the area. County, state, and federal partners continue to monitor the situation. You will be informed of any conditions that affect your safety. Thank you for listening. Have a safe day. This is your Hawaii County Civil Defense.
It is causing earthquakes, some reaching 6.2 on the Richter scale as the crater from the volcano collapses. We're wondering if this is somehow to be interpreted in light of Romans chapter 8, where the creation itself groans out, where we are told there will be an increase in seismic activities and other such natural phenomena in the last days. So what we see happening geologically and seismologically is a reflection of something that's happening spiritually. Just a thought, but Romans 8 does cause us to look at the scriptures prophetically from that particular angle, as President Trump this week takes incredible action. The opening of the American Embassy in Jerusalem is coming up within approximately 1 week.
Friends, we are almost ready to open the beautiful new embassy in Jerusalem, Israel. We're so excited. Look around here. We have a beautiful stage getting ready. We have the official seal of the United States Embassy. We have the dedication plaque. They're covered right now, but on Monday they're going to be unveiled. We are extremely excited. We look forward to broadcasting live on our Facebook link. The embassy staff is working around the clock to get ready. We're anticipating a beautiful, inspirational, moving event. As they say in the Passover Haggadah, L'Shana Haba Yerushalayim, this year, thanks to the U.S. administration, the courage, the vision of President Donald Trump, we can say L'Shana Hazot Yerushalayim, this year in Jerusalem.
And the spiritual battles over Israel rage as a result. Let's begin with the withdrawal of Barack Obama's make-believe treaty that was never official or ratified by the Senate that gave $150 billion in release funds to the Iranians to fund terror, in addition to the additional $1.5 billion cash delivered secretly in suitcases under the auspices of peace, courtesy of Barack Obama and John Kerry, and the results of it. None of that money was, of course, used to help the Iranian people economically. Their economy continues to remain in serious trouble. What they have done since Obama gave them the money was increase their support for international terror, including the Al-Quds Brigade of the Iranian Guard, and stepped up sponsorship of both Hezbollah and Hamas, as well as the Houthi rebels in Yemen, again, paid for by Barack Obama and John Kerry. What they've also done is increase their military spending by 40%. The Iranian people got nothing. The Iranian rial is worth approximately 1/6 of what it was at the time that this so-called peace deal was concluded. That was ultimately rejected by Mr. Pence, much to the gratitude of Israel, of the Emirates, and of Saudi Arabia. There are 4 essential reasons it was rejected. 1 is the lack of verification. 2 is the sunset clause that will allow the Iranians to resume development of nuclear weapons and weapons-grade plutonium almost immediately within 7 years. 3 is the continual Iranian funding of terror. And fourthly, the release of the documentation captured by the Israeli Mossad showing that Iran lied right from the beginning and that Washington and Europe knew they were lying when they said they had no nuclear weapons ambitions. Putting these 4 things together, it was rejected. European powers wanting to see European companies do business with Iran, of course, objected. The has-been powers of Europe, Angela Merkel, Theresa May, unfortunately, and Mr. Macron all sent delegations or came themselves to try to persuade Mr. Trump to continue with the Obama agreement, despite the fact that Iran was continuing in its missile development to have a delivery system for nuclear weapons that it could develop very quickly once the sunset clause kicked into effect. The fact that there was no verification, the fact that they were engaged with Al-Quds in Syria, none of this meant anything to Merkel, to Theresa May, or to Macron. The Iranians made it clear they weren't going to renegotiate it. For the moment, the Iranians are saying they'll continue to keep the deal with Europe, but this is only a stopgap measure because they're in trouble economically. Again, their currency is 1/6 the value it was only several years ago against the US dollar. There's 12% unemployment in Iran, and there is a lot of increased social and political opposition to the regime. Hence, the Iranians have internal issues. At the same time, they're trying to consolidate their position externally. So it begins. Mr. Trump did the right thing, we believe, as he said he would. Without putting delivery systems, that is the weapons of missile technology that Iran has been consistently developing, on the table for negotiation, without verification, and that verification has been wholly inadequate. You could not inspect military bases. You had to give them up to a month's warning of the United Nations inspection. The fact that they were continuing to fund terror, there was no other option other than what Mr. Trump did. It will also hurt certain American companies in the short term, including Boeing. Nonetheless, corporate profits cannot and should not be put before national security. Again, the Europeans don't seem to care. They think that's the Americans' worry. Let's hope that the full force of these sanctions will come into play, and that any European company or any foreign company doing business with Iran in anything that's defense-related will be closed out to American markets. This has already begun to gain momentum and take effect. It was announced by the Wall Street Journal just today that together with United Arab Emirates, the funding of the Quds Force of individuals and Iranian companies involved in the transfer of funds illicitly for the funding of radicalism and terror have been brought to issue and Iran has been cited and sanctioned, all of these Iranian interests. It's the beginning of closing Iran out of the international financial system, which is largely controlled by the United States. They will not be able to do business in dollars. This is going to increase the economic problems in Iran tremendously. If the Israelis were to hit Karg Island, which I personally hope they do, this would devastate the Iranian economy. But we shall see what that shall come to. And so what happens? There has already been direct conflict, going back several weeks, as we've been reporting consistently on This Week in Prophecy, of direct confrontation and Israeli attacks against Iranian targets within Syria. Now, Syria, which finds itself a base for Iranian operations, is in a very precarious situation. The Assad regime claimed it did not know about the Iranian attacks on the Golan Heights, in which approximately 30 Iranian missiles were launched at Israeli military positions. So now you have a direct attack on Israeli soil by Iran from Syria. This follows the incursion by the drone that the Israelis managed to take down, although it cost them one fighter plane.
Remember, the U.S. has about 2,000 troops on the ground in Syria. It's clear the Pentagon would like to not get drawn into this. Last night, I reached a senior U.S. defense official after the strike began to ask if the U.S. military was being asked to help Israel, and was told there had been no request for support or any political decision made as of yet about the U.S. military getting further involved. The White House just released the following statement. Quote, the United States condemns the Iranian regime's provocative rocket attacks from Syria against Israeli citizens, and we strongly support Israel's right to act in self-defense. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, bears full responsibility for the consequences of its reckless actions, and we call on the IRGC and its militant proxies, including Hezbollah, to take no further provocative steps. This is the largest Israeli strike in Syria since the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Russia said Israel used 28 warplanes, F-15 and F-16 fighter jets to fire 60 air-to-surface missiles and 10 surface-to-surface missiles. The raid lasted 2 hours and targeted dozens of sites where Iranian advisors are based in Syria after Iran fired 20-plus rockets into the Golan Heights. Some of the Iranian missiles managed to break through Israel's missile defense known as the Iron Dome, according to a U.S. congressman who chairs the Homeland Security Committee and sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
Now we know that Iran is able to penetrate that Iron Dome. They fired 20 missiles. Some of them actually got through the Iron Dome. Israel responded with a very strong retaliatory response against Iran in Syria. It's important to note that Iran is in Syria. They're in Iraq. They're in Lebanon. And that's where they've taken the money from the sanctions.
The Iranian strike on Israeli targets came a day after President Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, and just over 2 weeks after U.S. Central Command General Joe Votel was invited to Israel on an unusual trip, given that Israel does not fall under CENTCOM. Syria, however, does. Israel has been telegraphing for months that it would not stand by and allow Iranian infrastructure to grow unchecked in neighboring Syria. In the past 7 years, Julie, Israel has carried out more than 100 airstrikes in Syria since the civil war began, but last night's was by far the largest strike.
In the meantime, however, of the 30 missiles that were fired by the Iranians, 27 were either taken down by the Israeli Iron Dome defense system or they fell short. Only 3 actually approached the targets, doing no damage. But the Israelis responded immediately, hitting over 50 major Iranian targets inside of Syria, doing very significant damage and killing a number of Iranians. Hence, the direct military conflict between Israel and Iran that we've been predicting on This Week in Prophecy for the last 2.5 months has begun taking place this week. But it is broadened out. Thus far, nothing has happened in Lebanon, although in Lebanon, essentially, Iran won the election, with Hezbollah having more seats in the new Iranian-backed Hezbollah faction within the Lebanese parliament. But where we are seeing increased conflict at the behest of Iran is not only the kites, but this Friday, today, grenade attacks on Israel, on Israeli positions inside Israel from the Gaza Strip. A total of 15,000 protesters amassed along the Gaza-Israeli border fence with grenades and projectiles being thrown into Israel. Hence, Iran is definitely kicking up a storm. It has not been happy since the disclosure by Mr. Netanyahu of the atomic records that were captured by the Mossad, involving up to 100 Mossad agents and operatives inside the middle of Tehran and smuggling them out to Israel. This infuriated the Iranians to the point where they believed they had to respond in some way. The left-wing press in the United States and in Europe are, of course, attributing the Iranian attacks on Israel to the opening of the American embassy in Jerusalem and to Mr. Trump's rejection of Mr. Obama's false peace deal with Iran. But of course, these things were brewing well before that. There had already been armed conflict inside Syria between Israel and Iran, and the case of the downed Israeli plane and the Iranian drone, assisted with Soviet advisors in technology, undoubtedly, being downed inside of Galilee on the Israeli side of the border. So in addition to the kites, now we have the use of grenades and projectiles. Do not overlook what's happening along the Gaza border by simply focusing on what's happening in the Golan Heights. The Israelis took out over 50 targets. Air raid sirens sounded in the Golan. Israelis were advised to go to the protective mikratot, to the air raid shelters, which they did. But there's been no Israeli casualties thus far, although probably at least 23 known Iranians have been killed in these airstrikes. Now, what is very interesting about this is Mr. Assad claimed that it was an Iranian action to which the Assad regime was not a partner. And it took place while Benjamin Netanyahu was invited by Mr. Putin to Moscow for a military celebration commemorating the downfall of Nazism and the Third Reich. Mr. Putin has assured the Israelis that the Russians have not supplied the S-300 missile system to Syria. This may be true, it may be false, but that nonetheless is his claim. It is obvious that the Israelis warned Russia what was going to happen, as did the United States. And it would seem that Mr. Putin has stood by and allowed the Israelis to do what they're going to do in response to Iranian aggression, at least up to a point. Avi Lieberman, the Israeli Secretary or Minister of Defense, has warned Mr. Assad, do not support the presence of Iran in your country. The Israelis will target the Assad government, what's left of his regime, and his military fortifications if they cooperate with the Iranians. Hence, the Syrian government of Assad, or what's left of it, is under tremendous military pressure and political pressure from the Israelis. Russia seems, for the moment, to be standing somewhat aside, allowing this to take place. This is all very, very interesting, the way it is unfolding. Russia is doing nothing. Nothing. Meanwhile, however, although the Israeli air attacks and artillery attacks from the Golan Heights on Iranian positions inside Syria have been intensive, airlifts of armaments, including missiles, have been continuing coming from Iran itself into positions in Syria. This includes the Fateh 313 advanced missile that has a greater range and accuracy than its earlier models. The Israelis have not been able to completely stop the deployment of Iranian missile systems inside Syria, although they have greatly upset it and are disturbing the basis from which these missiles would need to be launched. In other words, there's no place to go except to the next level of confrontation. which could bring Israel into direct confrontation with geographical Iran again. Bearing in mind that Israeli F-35s have already managed to permeate the Iranian air defense system using the new American planes with advanced avionic designs and stealth technology buttressed by some Israeli innovations. They were able to get in as a warning to Iran. So there's nowhere to go but further conflict unless Iran regresses. Iran says it does not want further conflict. At least that's what it's told Angela Merkel and what it's told certain European powers. However, it is simply biding for time. Iran will almost certainly, if not absolutely certainly, continue its nuclear development programs at the moment. The Trump administration, and Mr. Trump personally, has warned Iran, if they do so, there will be very serious ramifications. This thing is really, really beginning to heat up. And if Russia and possibly Syria, that is the regime of Mr. Assad, are no longer factors in the equations, the Israelis would have a free hand to deal with Iran. It is unknown if the Saudi Arabians would allow refueling at Saudi air bases by Israeli fighter craft attacking Iran, but it cannot be ruled out. There are other possible routes going via Syria and Iraq, but we do know that there are contingencies for the Israeli Air Force to make direct attack by jet fighter craft, mainly the F-15, on targets inside Iran itself. The F-15 is the only fighter craft in the Israeli arsenal at present that can carry a bunker-busting bomb, and only one at a time. Hence, the F-15 would need to be escorted by other fighter aircraft or other F-15s in order to be able to take out the targets and come back. It would be a slow, grueling process. It would not be a single strike. It would need to go on for days should targeting Iran proper come into the equation. But the capacity of the Israelis to badly cripple, further cripple the Iranian economy is obvious. They can take out the dams, which provide 60% of the electricity. They could greatly damage oil production, and if they took out Kharg Island, there goes Iranian exports. 90% of their fossil fuel export market is related in some way to the export marine facilities at Kharg Island. This is not being talked about publicly, but it's certainly being discussed in the corridors of power, in the Pentagon, and in the Israeli military headquarters in Tel Aviv. Iran is playing a very dangerous game, and the Israelis know it. But with Russia, apparently, for the moment at least, stepping aside, anything, almost anything, can happen. Let's continue looking at what's taking place this week in prophecy. Meanwhile, a senior Iranian cleric with governmental influence, Ayatollah Ahmed Khamenei, said that Tel Aviv and Haifa will be destroyed by Iranian missiles and that the United States can do nothing. The Israelis do not take kindly to those kinds of threats. Watch this space. There could be attacks on Tel Aviv and Haifa. The Iranians are outraged at what is happening. They're holding their cards close to their chest. They're telling the Europeans that they want peace, but of course even the Europeans realize nothing that they say can be believed. But that's the situation at its present point in time. Meanwhile, the Singapore summit has been organized following the release of 3 American captives held by North Korea through the diplomatic efforts of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who is a believer, who's a born-again believer. We ask that you would pray for him and that we would also pray for Mr. Trump's nominee to replace him as head of the CIA. Again, the Islamo-friendly and Islamo-fascist-friendly liberal media and left wing of the American Democratic Party are throwing their usual tantrums, more concerned about protecting the rights of radical Muslims to kill Americans than they are in protecting the rights of Americans. This is the lunacy of the American left, but it is very much what is happening. It's quite a thing. In the Second World War, when waterboarding was used against captured Americans by the Japanese, it was done without medical supervision. Thus, it was considered to be torture. But the United States and other countries trains its fighter pilots and special forces using waterboarding under medical supervision. When it's done to our own pilots, again, it's considered to be training. But when waterboarding is used on people who led us to Osama bin Laden, it's considered to be torture. And the Democratic Party, particularly Senator Kamala Harris and others, throw their almost constitutional tantrum at the indignation of what we're doing to people who are trying to kill us. Despite the fact that in the state of California, which she represents in the U.S. Senate, radical Muslims killed 14 people in San Bernardino. They lived about 6 blocks from where I'm sitting at the moment, led in by the Hillary Clinton State Department, who gave them a visa because the Obama administration said it would violate their rights to do a Facebook or internet search about their background before allowing them to come into the country. This is how ridiculous it actually is. Mr. Trump realizes the absurdity of these things for what they are. Nonetheless, Samantha Powers and the usual liberals are kicking up their usual storm this week in prophecy, blaming Israel and blaming Mr. Trump for everything. But what do we expect? Ironically, and almost unthinkably, Bahrain, the Islamic Arab oil emirate on the Persian Gulf, has defended the Israeli reaction to Iran and the Israeli attacks on Iranian positions, saying that Israel has a right to defend itself. Now, this is a country that has never recognized Israel's right to exist and has at least diplomatically challenged it. Things are changing in the Middle East because of the Iranian factor. Again, we always point to Daniel chapter 10. May 12th, the Iraqi elections will take place. What is likely to happen in Iraq are increased political victories for Iranian-backed coalition forces in the Iraqi parliament, as took place in Lebanon. Iran is continuing to extend its grip by political as well as by military means, now into Iraq. Again, we go back to the double-barrel mistakes of the Bush and the Obama administration. First, it was Mr. Bush who went into Iraq without a plan to get out when his father could have removed Saddam Hussein in 1991 with the full backing of most of the Islamic Arab world, but did not do so. His son took us into an imbroglio after September 11th without a plan to get out. When the surge, engineered brilliantly by General Petraeus, worked, Barack Obama left a vacuum that was filled by ISIS, which he called a JV team. His JV team responsible for the murder of 14 Americans in San Bernardino within weeks of Mr. Obama calling them the JV team. I only hope God and history hold Barack Obama guilty for his crimes and hold to account those stupid enough to have supported him and believed the man who was such a detestable liar and friend of radical Islamic terror. That's what he did. He actually called them a JV team and gave these people visas to come in and kill us, and then gave 151.5 billion dollars to the Iranian regime to perpetuate its war on terror and its weapons development to attack moderate Gulf Arab states, Israel, and Western and American targets. Again, if this is not treason, I don't know what is. It is perhaps legally not treason, but people looking at this would have a hard time calling it or finding a euphemism for what the Obama regime did, together with his cohorts. I can't call him a traitor legally, in the legal sense, but in the spirit of his actions, it was tantamount to betrayal of the United States and our allies. It has now come to a head. So we shall see what transpires in the elections on May 12th. But again, Iranian gains. We are looking once more at the book of Daniel, chapter 10, this week in prophecy. Probably the last 5 major ISIS leaders were captured in a military operation by the Iraqi government and American advisors when they were lured from Syria into Iraq.
5 senior ISIS leaders have been captured in a joint operation involving Iraqi and U.S.-backed Syrian forces. It is the latest defeat for the extremist group, which has lost nearly all of the territory it once held in Iraq and Syria. Here's Jeff Pegues with more on this.
The ISIS commander's confessions were broadcast on Iraqi television this morning. One by one, the men in the yellow jumpsuits and handcuffs admitted to being top Islamic State leaders. Their capture was the result of an elaborate intelligence operation run by Iraq and the United States. First came the capture of Ismail al-Athawi, described as a close aide to ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. U.S. and Iraqi forces then used an app on Athawi's mobile phone to lure the other men across the Syrian border and into Iraq, where they were arrested. The Iraqi government said information gathered during interrogations led to an Air Force strike it claims killed another 40 ISIS terrorists. Michael Moriel is the former acting director of the CIA and a CBS News national security analyst.
These guys have an understanding of what's happened to ISIS post-caliphate, where the senior leaders are in general, what their plans might be for going forward.
U.S. officials say ISIS leadership has been decimated through airstrikes and ground operations, but al-Baghdadi is believed to still be operating on the border between Syria and Iraq. U.S. officials and the Iraqis, they're after al-Baghdadi.
His removal would be a symbol of the defeat of ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and he is a galvanizing force holding the rest of the group together. So if he went away, it would splinter apart.
So, Jeff, one of the questions here is, the administration keeps saying that ISIS has been all but defeated. Why is it still important to remove Baghdadi?
Well, U.S. officials also believe that al-Baghdadi is a threat because he's inspired attacks here in the U.S. For example, in the 2015 San Bernardino attack, which killed 14, the shooters pledged their allegiance to the ISIS leader. Jeff?
Jeff Pegues, thank you.
This leaves Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi isolated and alone without any staff or without any deputies. It is probably the functional end of ISIS in Iraq as we have known it, with the capture of these 5. Turkish intelligence gave the initial reports that led to luring them by American intelligence forces from Syria into Iraq, but the actual operation was carried out by Iraqi forces advised by the Americans. This week in prophecy, 5 of them captured. This is a perhaps penultimate setback for ISIS in Iraq and in Syria. But let's continue looking. Of the 50 sites hit by the Israelis, there are no key sites that were spared. The Israelis hit virtually every Iranian target inside of Syria, hit everyone, damaging them, although the Iranians are busily trying to redeploy new missiles in their place. It is probably time for the Israeli Air Force to declare northern Iraq or northern Syria a no-fly zone for Iranian and Syrian aircraft and down any aircraft coming into Syrian airspace from Iran. Second thing that needs to happen is the economic war on Iran must be matched by the Saudi Arabians. They cannot continue capitalizing on high oil prices. They must increase production. Now, the high prices hurt China and help fracking in the United States, but they also help Iran and they help Russia. Oil prices have been rising because of the declining production in Venezuela as their infrastructure falls to pieces, and because of the precarious situation with Iran. It is time for the Saudi Arabians to step up oil production and bring prices down to a reasonable level between 50 and 60, or certainly below $60 a barrel. The Saudi Arabians cannot expect the Americans to wage this economic war alone. They must play their part. They cannot expect the Israelis to carry out the warfare against the Iranians on their own. We accept the fact that Saudi Arabia is itself bogged down in armed conflict with Iran and Yemen, but they must cooperate not only with the United States, but with the Israelis, both strategically and in terms of intelligence sharing, but additionally in terms of oil supply and keeping the oil supply prices at a level it does not help Iran and does not hurt Western consumers. Let us continue looking at what's transpiring this week in prophecy. Following the T4 attack that we reported 3 weeks ago by the Israelis, further bombing of Iranian targets in Israel is almost certainly likely. What Iran will be doing in these next few days or next few weeks is something we need to watch very carefully. Remember, until now, the basic strategy of the Iranians has always been to use surrogates. That has always been their basic strategy. To use Hamas, to use Hezbollah, to use someone else. Now, it's the Iranian Revolutionary Guards in direct conflict with the Israelis and to a degree with the United States. We've been saying for some time that the Trump administration needs to determine it's time for Iran to leave Iraq. The United States should begin attacking Iranian targets from the air inside northern Iraq to disrupt their ambitions of having a Shia caliphate extending from Iran through Iraq into Syria and into southern Lebanon, with the arraignment of Hezbollah forces, perhaps in 200 villages under their direct control in southern Lebanon alone. Southern Lebanon is a powder keg. Gaza is a powder keg that's already not only sizzling, but has had some minor explosions. But what we've seen happen thus far in Syria and in Gaza may only be the cartoon before the movie unless something happens. Especially now that for some reason, Mr. Assad and Mr. Putin seem to be giving the Israelis a free hand, perhaps because they have no choice due to the policies of the Trump administration. That may be a factor. But let's continue looking at this. The left has asserted that by the United States backing out of the Obama agreement with Iran, that it will hurt American credibility in negotiations with North Korea. Of course, the conservatives and the Trump administration itself has said the diametric opposite is true. This was not a treaty that was approved of by the Senate. And in fact, it was something that never should have been concluded. The idea that Iran had been keeping it all along is nonsensical, because it was made on the pretense that they did not have nuclear ambitions to accumulate a nuclear arsenal, which is now proven to be a lie. It was a bad faith agreement. The insistence by Sandra Powers, who was born in Ireland, Mr. Obama's former U.S. ambassador to the UN, and other such people, such as John Kerry, who's been accused of carrying on in violation of the Logan Act, his own diplomacy in support of the Obama sellout, that it hurts the credibility of the United States not to remain in an agreement that was made on bad faith by people whom they knew were lying to us. You couldn't make this up. It is so absurd. But this is indeed the absurdity of the American left. We again continue to request prayer for Mr. Trump and Mr. Pence. They have blessed Israel. The embassy will open in Jerusalem next week, and God is watching over his word to perform it. He will bless those who bless, as well as curse those who curse. It has also become clear, and as Mr. Trump enunciated most aptly, that if Iran does acquire nuclear weapons, it's unthinkable that Saudi Arabia will not want them also. The Pakistani nuclear scientist Khan, who helped Pakistan to achieve a nuclear weapons capability, who the CIA wanted, but the Pakistani government would not give up, in the scandal with Banir Bhutto. How much technology for uranium enrichment for weapons-grade plutonium he actually provided to the Saudis may be known by the CIA and the Mossad. It's not in the public domain. But clearly, the Saudis had their own plans to develop a nuclear capacity in response to Tehran. Now that's interesting. They never wanted to develop one in response to Israel, but only in response to their fellow Muslims, the Iranians, their ancient enemies. And so it continues this week in prophecy. All of these things are coming into play simultaneously. One final report from Europe. It is being debated in the European Parliament and in diplomatic circles that over the next 2 years, there are approximately 200 radical Islamic terrorists, or those with terror associations, who tried to go and join ISIS or Al-Qaeda in the Middle East and were arrested and are in prison in Europe, will be due for release in the next 2 years, over 200, because the European law only allows for these people to be detained in prison for up to 6 years. Following the Islamic terrorist attacks in Paris, Brussels, Germany, and elsewhere, as well as in London, the Europeans are beginning to have second thoughts about their kid gloves with which they treated radical Islam. Again, we're reminded of Obadiah 15. The way they condemned Israel for standing up to radical Islam, the same ghosts are going to come back to haunt them. Obadiah, verse 15. And so it goes. May 12th, watch the elections in Iraq following the elections in Lebanon. Iran is looking to make major political gains. Watch if or not the Iranians hold to the nuclear deal with Europe. They will not. Although they are saying they will do it short term, they are simply trying to consolidate their position to figure out what they're going to do next. But they will undoubtedly unleash an effort to redevelop their nuclear arsenal. Of course, the left will blame Mr. Trump for this, but in fact, they were going to do it anyway. At least now we're dealing in the real world, not the fantasy world of delusion that was constructed by the Obama administration and the European left. More Israeli airstrikes are almost inevitable to take place in Syria, although there is a momentary lull. The Al-Quds Force will be the chief targets of the Israeli Air Force and artillery positions on the Golan Heights. Again, these things can burst out at any moment. Something, however, is going to have to be done further south along the Gaza-Israel border concerning the kites, with the incendiary devices, Molotov cocktails, and other low-tech weapons being launched by kites from inside Gaza. The Iron Dome only defends again against high-tech weapons, but something is bound to happen. Today, with grenades having been thrown over the fence, there is a new height of confrontation, and Iran has a hand in it. It is always Iran, 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 not the Arabs. Now again, we have said many times, highlighted many times, with the possible exception of Libya, there is no mention in the nations coming against Israel, any Arabs, in a Gog and Magog scenario. It's Iran. It's Daniel 10. Watch this space. this week in prophecy. Coming to you from California, my name is James Jacob Prasch. God bless, and please pray for President Trump and for Prime Minister Netanyahu. God bless.
Thank you, Jacob.